Hello and welcome back to my channel. Another week, another set of interesting stories to talk about in the collegiate track and field world. First, I would like to say thank you to all those who have been listening to me over the season. I ask that you please continue to engage and share your comments and your thoughts. Please like, subscribe, and share. Today's video will be a little different because not a lot happened on the weekend. There were some big moments, but as expected, things were a little quiet. It was more of what we call DMR weekend, and even that opened some strange can of worms. We do have some number one performances to talk about, and we'll share them, but we won't break it up into our traditional four leg format because we have four stories to talk about. But I do want to also give a highlight at the end to the conferences that have already had a conference championship, such as the SWAC, which had one athlete in particular, Jamarian Stubbs, who was a big time star last outdoor season, who chose to stay at a small. I don't want to say small school, it's Alabama State's nice size school, but it's not doesn't have the same notoriety as the University of Alabama. It is an HBCU, one of the more famous HBCUs, specifically when it comes to sports and their incredible band. But maybe not Alabama A&M band, but still, shout out to Alabama State, and we'll talk more about the SWAC in a moment. But let's dive right into the number one performances. And first, we'll talk about Johnny Brackens of USC. He has been the top guy in the country when it regards to the 60-meter hurdles. And he kind of, pulled away, if you will, from Malachi Snow of Texas Tech, who I still think will be in it with him in a couple of weeks at the indoor championships. He ranked 7.43 and almost made Team USA indoors. There is a World Championship indoors this year. It'll be in Nanjing, China. Um, and of course, Grant Holloway made the team again. Just, I want to say it's 80 plus consecutive wins indoor. I mean, he makes it seem so easy. I feel like with his speed and his stride, he's perfect for the indoor race. Just consistently dominant as a hurdler. And Johnny Brackens, I think, hopes to be of that level. Again, running 7.43, an incredible time, further cementing his status as the number one hurdler. He's been number one literally from the very first race of the indoor season that he had. He has gained control over that number one ranking and has not let up. And I think he probably won't face a challenge from a collegiate athlete again until the national championships, where he is facing off against Malachi Snow. Um, a lot of teams took the weekend off to focus on conference championships, but I said this in the last video. He's so far ahead of the number two in the country that it really didn't matter. Or not really in the country, but in the conference. He's at 7.4. The fastest hurdler, number two in the conference of the Big Ten, is 7.7. That's a noticeable set of steps ahead. So he, is comfortably good, and I don't think there was any worry that he wouldn't, be in good enough shape to win. I think they're pretty convinced that not only can he win the 60 hurdles, he would win it easily. And he may not even compete, at the Big Ten championships. We'll see. I mean, again, he's an easy win for them, and this is USC's first go around in the Big Ten. So it'll be interesting to see what athletes they send because they look so dominant, specifically on the men's side. And our other number one performance is not technically a number one, and it's not even technically the national record. It legally will get that title in the DMR for Virginia. Their time of 9:14:19 is the fastest ever on a 200-meter track, whether banked or flat. Um, and the time that was ran last weekend by Washington was, of course, on an oversized track. And we'll talk more about the differences between those at the end. But, there seems to be more recognition of banked 200-meter tracks. They get the records. And my thinking is if that's the case, then stop celebrating when a record happens on an oversized track. That's just my thing. It is the same distance. It does not matter. It is in a building. They ran. But let's stop all the funniness. Um, Officially, you're gonna hear Virginia really kind of has the legal fastest time of 9:14:19, But we're not going to forget the 9:14:10 that Washington ran last week, especially when we look at the official sheet. The time at the top is not 9:14:19, it's 9:14:10. So we're going to recognize that incredible performance by Virginia because they dominated. And I said, there would be the list would change this week. The DMR would look very different, and it does. It looks very different. There's some teams that are now on the outside looking in, like at Arkansas. Arkansas men are on the outside looking in. They're in number 13. So they're going to have to put together a really good team at the SEC championship in order to compete and try to make the NCAA meet. If not, they're not going to make it in that event. And I think because they're a team looking to win a national title, you don't want to leave an event that you could potentially qualify up to chance. So could this potentially hurt some points at the SEC meet? It may, but they are so deep and so far ahead, I think, of everyone in their conference. I think Florida is better geared for a major championship meet than even conference. And right now, conference wise, they're not looking the strongest. And, the postseason is really kind of where Florida has shined, specifically the last couple of years. Right now, they're not looking like they are even the number two in conference. It's really looking like it's going to be an Arkansas Texas A&M battle. And I think Arkansas will let the chips fall where they may. I think they're more focused on having enough talent and enough athletes competing at the national championships because they're going to need it. Because not only is USC going to bring a lot of talent, USC is also very top heavy and very strong at what they're good at. Now, moving to some of the women's performances, in the women's side, you have Antoinette Nabway of Minnesota. She is now our new national leader in the women's weight throw, 77 feet, 3 and 3/4 inches, 23.56 meters. It's surprising they lose Shelby Frank, who transferred to Texas Tech, but here they have Antoinette Nabway, and they seem to have not missed a beat. They're still, a very strong program at developing great throwers, and she's no different. 77 feet, 3 and 3/4 inches, 23.56 meters. This is a very talented thrower that we have not mentioned, but she's been near the top pretty much all season. So here she is now, the number one. She's officially solidified it going into conference championship season. Remains to be seen what happens with her next weekend at the Big Ten, or this coming weekend, the Big Ten championship. The Big Ten again will be very competitive. I believe 16 schools. Some of those really good West Coast schools are going to be competing, but she's number one, so I don't think she's faced by anybody she'll be competing against. We'll see. She's certainly deserving to be mentioned in the title hunt because she vaunted herself to number one. Even though she's not been mentioned on this channel, she's again been a top 5 performer pretty much all year. She's also a pretty good shot thrower. So we may not hear the last of Miss Nabway. A similar situation on the women's side with the DMR is that Oregon has the official, they broke the national record, 10:42:05. But just like on the men's side, when you hand in the stat sheet of who's at the top, they're not even going to come in the top 4. They're going to come in at number 5. We cannot ignore the sub 10:40 performances by BYU. And BYU is having an incredible year. They've had a great run at this when it comes to developing top tier distance talent and depth for the past, I want to say 5 to 6 years, but this year they seem to be pushing it over because we're talking the past 5 to 6 years. That includes a really great steeplechaser and a really great 3K runner in Courtney Wayman, who did a wonderful job of anchoring their DMR during her time. But here they are now, a new crew, and they're still dominant, and perhaps even more so because they're the top 2 in the 3K in the country, and they might finish that way come championship season. We're going to learn a lot about how they perform in a team championship setting this coming weekend with the Big 12 championships. But Big 12, BYU has come in and not had missed a beat. They were once in a smaller conference, a non-power conference, and they've come into the Big 12 and they've been really a dominant team. And it looks like they'll be that way again come this weekend. We'll see. It's a new look Big 12. I'm very curious how some of these conference titles will shake up. Things are going to be very different this weekend. It's really a Power 4, no longer a Power 5, no longer considered BCS schools. It's a Power Four, Big Ten, Big 12, ACC, and the SEC. And all these conferences are larger than they've ever been. And you still got the Big East, which will have Providence and Georgetown running there. But those four schools, excuse me, four conferences are the stars. And they have 15 to 16 schools in them. This is going to be tough. I mean, just getting to the final of a conference championship is going to feel like getting to the national. So, you want to compete at Division One young high school athlete? It does not hurt to go to a smaller conference school and say, maybe I'm better off here and developing here unless I know for certain and I'm capable of competing at that high level literally every single time you get to the track. You're going to learn that real quickly anyway, going to Division One as a freshman, but you're going to get a real wake up call when you walk into the SEC, the Big Ten, the ACC, or the Big 12. And some of those freshmen are learning now because although you have freshmen leading or potentially qualifying, there really isn't a freshman, at least to my knowledge, outside of India Mayberry, that's really just kind of blowing the field away. And it's always maybe one or two. It's never really a whole group of freshmen. So keep that in mind because this coming conference championship weekend is going to be a wake up call for quite a few teams. But in the DMR, Oregon ran 10:42:05. That is going to be the banked or the 200-meter track record. Again, BYU ran their time on an oversized track. So let's park that here. What is an oversized track? So an oversized track is a track with either 300 meters, 300 yards, anything longer than 200 meters indoors. Initially, tracks were 200 meters and flat, and then they were given a small embankment to a large embankment to handle specifically those 200-meter runners when they are running around that curve. They're shooting up a hill and then coming back down to make up for the very tight turns that a flat track has, because it is often really difficult, for a taller runner, really any runner, to run a solid 200 on a bank or a flat track. It's difficult. As a kid who grew up in Michigan and who's been at the Eastern Michigan University track a lot, that's a flat track. Watching some athletes run these incredible 60 times, and it doesn't always equate to a great indoor 200s because that turn is so tight. And on the oversized track, it fits the same type of turn that you would experience outdoors. So it's a lot more comfortable. It's a lot easier to run. And it's a track where times tend to be a lot better, just a lot better. Uh, my thinking on that is if we are not going to consider those times as national records or put an asterisk by them, we probably shouldn't allow there to be major championships at those races, and we shouldn't set those times then. Because again, when you look at the stat sheet, they're not going to see number one Oregon DMR 10:42:05. They're going to see the 10:37 ran by BYU. That's what they're going to see. They're not going to see this new set of rules 10:42 as the fastest time because it's not going to be listed as the fastest time. So, in my opinion, can we do away with that? Can we just be willing to accept that the 300-meter oversized track, those times are just as good, just as solid, and just as capable of earning the record mark as a 200-meter flatter bank track? Can we just dead that? Please, because it's annoying, it's confusing, and the last thing our sport needs is to create confusion for someone who's a viewer. Not necessarily a fan, but a viewer. And more importantly, the young fans that are coming up that are trying to learn the sport, you don't want to confuse them where it's uncomfortable, where it feels like if I run great here, it's not going to be accepted. The time should be accepted anywhere, period. Full stop. And so that's my thoughts and opinions on that. And closing out here, just a nice brief shout out to the SWAC. They had a pretty competitive conference championship, and hats off to the women of Alabama State, because at one point I didn't think they were going to have enough to win this year because they didn't have the 400-meter depth, but they made up for it in their 800-meter runners. And they put together a good 4x4 when they didn't even have one of the best. They didn't even have a top five 400 runner, but they still were able to put together enough talent to win the 4x4. Hats off to Jermaine Stubb of Alabama State. He ran a 20.3, and the closest person to him in the conference ran a 20.9 was a freshman, I believe, at Alcorn State, um, ran 20.98. But for him to dominate, that solidly, 20.3, he's going to be a name to be reckoned with come indoors. He's now number three in the country. He ran that time with ease. He ran it against, practically no competition and comfortable. Let's see what he does when he has to get his feet wet with some of the big boys. He proved that he can hang with them last outdoor season, nearly almost winning a national title. So let's not forget his name, Jamarian Stubbs of Alabama State. And that's our video for this week. I will do a preview video. It will be long because I'm not going to break it up into chunks like I normally do. I normally do a women's video and a men's video. What I've discovered is that it actually may work best if we put it all together. I'm going to try to be um, as short as I can, but I love this and I like to talk about it and I like to engage with you in it. So if it is a little long and any critique that you offer, or you say, you know what, perhaps it is best, share that. Perhaps it is best that you go back to breaking it up. Put that in the comments, and I will take that. But please like, comment, subscribe, share the video, and I will see you again this week when we discuss our preview of what should be an exciting conference championship weekend. Thank you for your support.